You're listening to The Voluntary Life, where you can hear ideas for finding freedom in an unfree world. Visit thevoluntarylife.com to connect with the show and hear all past episodes. Here's your host, Jake.
Hi, it's Jake here. This is another episode about permanent travel, and I'm very pleased to have a special guest. It's Andrew Henderson, who's the founder and host of the Nomad Capitalist Report. Hi, Andrew.
Jake, it's great to be with you from Kuala Lumpur, and appreciate your having me on the show.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. It's also been fun hearing about your recent trip. You've been, seems like you've been all over the place there in Southeast Asia. So where have you been and how's your trip going?
Well, I have been all over Southeast Asia. I've spent a lot of time in Asia, and frankly, the things that I look at when it comes to my background as an entrepreneur and the things I look at for investing in business going forward, a lot of those things are in Asia. So, this year I've been pretty much all over, from the Philippines to Brunei to Singapore, here in Malaysia a couple times, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Thailand. I actually got denied access to Myanmar just the other day, which is why I'm here. Air Asia has gone downhill. It's funny, I was talking to Jeff Berwick about this on Facebook, about how we both used to love flying on Air Asia, which was probably the best low-cost carrier in the world. And you could fly, for example, from here to Kuala Lumpur to Singapore for like $10. But now they've gotten big, and they've gotten this huge route. They're flying all over the world. And, we were thinking that they're now in bed with a big government, and if they don't want you to go to Myanmar, they won't let you. So that was the one place I missed. I hope to go back there, but I've covered a lot of other ground.
Awesome. So the name of your show is Nomad Capitalist Report, and this is obviously something that is very that you're living in your lifestyle. So what is a nomad capitalist?
Well, it's funny. A while back, I was investing in various businesses. I wanted a kind of a brand for what I was doing, and I'd always been a traveler. Even when I was running businesses, I was traveling, half the year to Europe and Asia and what have you. And so that's very nomadic in and of itself. But I said, I would like to write about it, as I do now on my site and as we talk about it on my radio show. I'd like to share with people the idea that my parents shared with me at a very young age. I was about 12, and my parents were looking at various countries around the world, and they said, you'll be alive for another 70 years or so. And when you study history, and when you understand how societies work, and when you look at how the U.S. government is working, even right now in the 1990s, we think that there will be a time when this will not be the place for you to be. And be open to that fact that you may want to go and live somewhere else where talented people like you are treated better. And so the whole philosophy behind Nomad Capitalist is not that you have to be a perpetual traveler. I get emails all the time, comments about, how do I do this with my kids, with my wife? And it's not all about bouncing around to Kuala Lumpur for 3 weeks and then Singapore for a week. It's not that. But what it is understanding that there may come a time when you have to expatriate, when you have to go somewhere else because that's where you will be treated best, where your money will be treated best, where your business will be treated best. And to be a nomad, like on the steps of the plain, on the steppe of Mongolia, you go somewhere, you hunt for as long as you can, you get the great meat, and you eat, and you pitch your tent there, and you stay there until everything that you went there in the first place for is gone, and then you go to the next place. And I think that we're seeing that if you're in the United States or the UK, I think that, look, the herd is gone. The herd has moved on, and you need to follow with it and go there for as long as the herd is there.
Right, yeah. Well, it does. It's really interesting because it does really feel like we're living in a time when things are just tipping in the world. Like the center of gravity seems to really have moved, or is in the process of moving. To Asia, as you describe, and I think that's a really interesting time to be someone who's come from the West and is now looking for new opportunities out there. So, how did you actually start traveling and getting involved in sort of overseas entrepreneurship? Did you go to college, or did you go straight into business? What was your background?
So my parents kind of put that sense of travel into me. We traveled somewhat abroad and also in the United States when I was a kid, and it was always interesting to make observations. I remember being in Portugal at age 8 or 9, and when one of our guides was talking about, or was asking us where we were from, we told him. Actually, he didn't have to ask us. He said, "I know by your shoes. Only Americans wear shoes like that." And so now that I'm older and an adult, I buy my own shoes. I don't get that anymore. So people think I'm from Europe. But he said, all of our leaders are going to the U.S. for medical care. And that was like the first real observation I made that said, things are different elsewhere, and maybe you can benefit from that. And the more I traveled, I started traveling early in my 20s. I was in Norway first because I have Norwegian ancestry, and I wanted to explore that. And I think once you get that bug, it just grows and grows and grows. And then I wanted to travel more, and then I wanted to go more adventurous places. And I'm still in that thing now where it's like now I want to go to Iran and North Korea and do stuff like that. And so, I never went to college. I did, actually. I went for about a year. I shouldn't say never, but I kind of slept through it. And, I don't like being told what to do. So I left. I started a business at 19 and eventually became an 8-figure, radio company in a very niche part of radio. I think you learn so many more lessons from travel, from running your own business. I've invested in other businesses and I've helped people start businesses. And I think every time I've learned something that I use to this very day when I'm looking at businesses. And I know things that I would not have known from sitting in a classroom, real world experience. And the same goes with traveling and seeing, and just making the observations. Why is it that this currency is this? Why is it that this interest rate here is different than here? You start to put the pieces together.
Right, absolutely. Well, so that's really interesting to hear about. So, if you've been starting business and involved in investment in various places, what are your favorite places at the moment, just in terms of both the opportunity, but also, the experience of doing business? And what are some of the differences that you have experienced investing or starting business in different parts of the world?
Well, the one thing that I talked about earlier was, I'm a big Asia fan. I am, working on plans for next year to be in Eastern Europe, to be in parts of South America as well. But I look at, I had Harry Dent on my show recently, who's the author of The Roaring 2000s and other books, and I loved reading that as a kid, as well as Jim Rogers' book, Adventure Capitalist, which I guess was why I probably wasn't going on a lot of dates at 15 years old, because I wanted to talk about the Roaring 2000s, and they were drinking beer out of like Solo cups in someone's basement without a ping pong table. I love. He talks about demographics. Is the point? I look at not only demographics but culture. I think Asia has a great culture for business. Not all of it. Thailand is an abysmal dump. And I would never invest a penny there. But most of the rest of it, I'm a big fan of. So I'm a fan of Cambodia. I think it's a very frontier market. There's some great opportunities there. Laos, not as much, but I still think you could start some very simplistic businesses there and solve basic problems. I'm not totally on board with Vietnam, but I think it's better than some people portray it as. Look, I think that doing business in China is easier than it is in the U.S., and I have a great affinity for the Chinese culture, which I think really is all about getting things done, which is important, I think. Right. Now, they don't necessarily need you, so you may be out of luck in many regards if you're a Westerner, but there may be times they do need you and you can work with them. So I look for that. I look, the one thing I offer, Jake, is I say, not only how easy is it to be successful in business if you work hard, but how many people can start a business. And I look at places like Cambodia, and I think it's easier for the average person to start a business than it is in the U.S. I'm not saying anyone can just come in and just do nothing and be lazy and be successful, but I think there are fewer barriers to entry. And so that's one thing that I look for on top of the cultural issues is, can the average person come here, even if they don't have a ton of money, and do something?
Right. And that is because there's just less bureaucracy and more of a kind of free market, so to speak? Is that the way that you view it for those kind of places?
Yeah, I do think Cambodia is pretty hands-off. Obviously, China in some regards is not hands-off, but nor is the United States or the UK. I think that while I do find government very distasteful and think it really doesn't serve much purpose, I also realize, and obviously people should take heed, there are certain laws Americans in particular have to abide by in regards to this. But here's the thing. If there's a way for you to get around some of that regulation, to me, I don't really see it. To me, it's not really regulation. So in Cambodia, yes, unless you're going to go into mining or something like that, casinos, you don't have to deal with much government nonsense. But there are other countries where there is government nonsense, in Vietnam, for example. But if you're running a small business, the cost of not dealing with that nonsense is low. Now, again, Americans have to take into consideration the nonsense, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So I'm not telling people what they should do. What I'm saying is, look, the United States, for example, is a big, looming bureaucracy that is, in reality, very corrupt. But the difference is, in the United States, they call corruption lobbying. In the rest of the world, they call it corruption. It's much more transparent as to what the corruption is. In the United States, they just have the world's best propagandists. So, obviously I'd like to go to a place where there isn't the regulation, but also, I mean, if it's a case of nobody follows the regulation and nobody seems to care, then, that's another thing entirely.
Right. So I wanted to ask you about something that I know you have a lot of expertise in and have thought a lot about and talked to a lot of people on your show about, and that is some of the ideas about diversification for entrepreneurs, and in particular this idea of some people call it five flags theory and so forth. I wonder if you could give a bit of a summary of what this idea is for people who have never kind of encountered it before.
I believe it started with three flags back a long time ago, and Doug Casey and W.G. Hill were guys who talked a lot about this, but so now, there's five flags or six flags, and basically the concept is, again, going where you're treated best. It was funny because I've always felt this way. I've been a lifelong libertarian, basically, grew up in a political family, lifelong traveler, lifelong business guy ever since I was 11 or 12. And so I had most of these ideas, and I never really realized it, and I finally said, flag theory, that's kind of what I've always thought.
Right.
Where, listen, Cambodia is a great place to invest, and yes, you could get a decent apartment, but you might get tired of it a little bit. So maybe you want to live in Hong Kong, and you're going to fly in and manage your businesses. Maybe, however, Cambodian corporations are a bit shaky. No one wants to deal with them. But Hong Kong corporations where you live have too many reporting requirements and audit requirements. So you're going to set up a corporation in Belize or the Seychelles where there's no reporting. And then, you don't want to keep your money in Hong Kong because you want it to be diversified. Maybe you're afraid, I wouldn't be, but maybe you're afraid of mainland China taking over eventually. So you're going to have your bank account for your Seychelles corporation that's headquartered in Hong Kong. Your bank account will be in Singapore. And the idea is that, we're all born to be patriotic and wave the flag and say, we are from the best country on earth. Everyone says that. But your country is probably not the best on earth for anything, let alone all the things. And so, Hong Kong is the freest economy in the world. Singapore is behind it. But if you don't want to spend $5,000 a month to live in a broom closet, you can live, for example, here in Kuala Lumpur much more cheaply, but base your finances there. I think Ireland's a fantastic place. Love it. And look, they have not bowed to the EU in raising their corporate tax rate. Good for them. But why would you pay any tax rate when you could pay zero? You could live in Ireland and run your business somewhere else. So it's taking the best of all worlds and saying, you know what? Let governments compete. If we have to deal with the government at all, we got to make them work for us, not the other way around.
Right, yeah. It strikes me that it's really just doing what a lot of people do within a country on a global scale and just behaving as effectively a citizen of the world. So, if someone lives in one country, they may have a bank account in one place and they may work in a different town and they may own property back home in their hometown or something like that. And this is really just the same kind of thing, only applied to the world, to treat the world as your home in a way. And that seems to me, the kind of diversification that you're talking about seems to make a lot of sense. I mean, it sounds like it can get pretty convoluted and complex, though. And is that something that you think is relevant for people who are starting out, or is this something that you think is something you build up over time? What's your approach to how necessary it is to kind of diversify in this type of way if you are planning to be an expat entrepreneur?
Well, I mean, one thing I do on my site, Nomad Capitalist, is I have a guide called 7 Steps to Global Economic Freedom. And I tell people, listen, these are 7 steps I think are important, but, if you don't follow every step, obviously you should adapt it to yourself. I mean, step number 1 is have some money out of the country. Mm-hmm. I don't care if you have 20 grand to your name. You can open a bank account in another country the same way you would open one on your own, and you can do it for a few $100s in some cases. In fact, I've talked to a banker friend of mine who says his bank in Singapore, you can do it for $1. I've not tried that, but that's what he says.
Right.
So, I mean, what's the reason not to do that? There are other steps that you can take as well to obtain freedom, but I think that the context is important. Obviously, it's not entirely an apples-to-apples comparison, but look, people who have their money in an IRA or in the stock market, they may likely own an emerging markets fund or an ETF or a mutual fund or something. And yes, they're not directly investing in Vietnam, but their money is being funneled around to different places. So people do have international exposure. People, deep down, I think people understand that just being a hermit and not ever leaving your borders and not doing anything different is not the best way to success. So, you can open bank accounts in a few jurisdictions online. You can set up corporations from home. You don't have to go to the Seychelles to have a Seychelles corporation. You call, people we talk about on our site and people you talk about. I mean, there's ways to find these people. And so, look, obviously people need to be aware that the biggest hurdle is probably dealing with their own government. The reporting requirements in the U.S. on your tax return, whatever, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it is kind of ridiculous. But, I think it's a lot more straightforward than people want to believe. I think that getting over the fear that we've been indoctrinated with that, if you put all your money in Singapore, you'll probably lose it all. I mean, give me a break. How many people bank in Singapore and no one's lost a penny? Now, I'm not making any promises for you, but I mean, come on. If every single person in an entire country was losing their money in some banking system, don't you think that would be front page news?
Right, yeah.
If all the banks in France just went under, don't you think you'd be hearing about the French people losing all of their life savings?
Well, and it's not as if there's a lot of safety in the Western banking system at the moment anyway. The whole thing's sort of teetering, as it has been for years. But, and I think that's really interesting for people who can sort of learn from your experience. So I wanted to ask you, on a kind of practical level, as an entrepreneur doing what you're doing, traveling around a lot, How does it work for you practically? I mean, I know that you have spoken on your show about virtual assistants and stuff. So you're traveling on your own? Do you just have a laptop? I mean, what is your sort of work setup look like?
Well, it's funny you asked that because I do try and do a few touristy things every once in a while. I'm not a backpacker, but I did head up. I was in Laos last week, and I went to Vong Vieng, which we used to have drugs and orgies and all kinds of crazy stuff. They closed a lot of that down, but it's very beautiful. And I was the only guy who had a real suitcase on the way up there. And everyone was like, who's this lunatic with a suitcase? What is this? What is it? Look at Mr. Trump, make way. But I have a backpack with a laptop, and I have an iPad I never use, and I have a little microphone for doing shows, and business cards, camera, that kind of stuff. And then I just bring lots of different clothes. I have suits and shorts and pants, and plenty of things for meeting people, but also relaxing. And it's someone who's never traveled. It could be seen as a little bit difficult, but you wheel around 30 or 35 kilos of luggage. You have a system down. You get into the groove pretty quickly.
Yeah. And do you go in for using virtual assistants to help your work, or is that something that you do?
Well, there are two things. I've written before about sites like Odesk, which I've used for more basic tasks. In fact, I just helped a friend set up some assistance for research he's doing on Odesk, and people in Bangladesh, what have you. I've hired guys like that for business stuff before. The issue with the virtual assistant that you share is that, for example, this one, I told this guy, I said, listen, my friend wants you 60 hours a week because he'd been badgering me forever. I want 60 hours a week, 60 hours a week. I said, here it is. And then, this guy's work came in, so now I'm only working 15 hours a week. Mm-hmm. So that can be very successful. Obviously, the more you pay, the better result you'll get. So some tasks, obviously, you'll have better results than very low-end tasks. What I found was, when I traveled, I was in Vietnam and I actually hired a full-time assistant. So to me, that's a system that I like. If you can afford, $300, $400, $500 a month, Vietnam, the Philippines.
Right, you hire someone locally to help you.
You just go there and just put up an ad on whatever the site is. I'm looking for an assistant. People come. In the Philippines, it's probably ground zero for that, but I think it's shifting to other parts in Asia. The Philippines is $500-600 a month for someone halfway decent, speaks good English. You probably don't even have to travel. I think you could do it over Skype or whatever. I just felt like meeting people was an extra little bonus. But if you have $500 a month and you're really serious about business, I would consider that route.
Cool. So I wanted to ask you, in this lifestyle of being a permanent traveler, and I appreciate that you're not. That doesn't mean that you're always on the road and so forth, and that you do spend time in the States as well. But still, in this lifestyle, I wanted to ask you, what sort of the worst and best aspects are for you in your experience of being a perpetual traveler?
Well, one of the comments I just got the other day was, I've been reading a lot of your stuff. I like it, but I got to thinking pretty quickly. This sounds like a guy who's single. I am single, and obviously, when you travel, you don't pack up all of your friends in the back of the Volkswagen Bug, and they all come along with you.
Right.
So you have to be confident. I enjoy spending time on my own and being reflective and thinking up business ideas. And I'm fortunate to have friends who will pick up the phone and chat about that kind of stuff. But if you have to be comfortable that you're going to be alone for some periods. Now I have friends, and I know you and I have a mutual friend who is married, for example, and they live in 3 or 4 places a year. And so I'm not saying it can't be done. I think even with kids, you could have some version of this lifestyle. But as to the best parts, listen, what do you get to see? It's amazing, the stuff that you get to see, the cultures you get to interact with. And here's the thing. I grew up in the United States. And again, like I said, I was riding my bicycle up and down the street where I lived when I was 11 or 12, before the internet was a big thing, trying to sell people who were selling their houses, their own website. And that was my first thing when I was in 6th grade. That was not a thing. That, along with reading Jim Rogers and just, wanting to, dress up and all this stuff, that was not something that endeared me to a lot of people in the United States. And I'm a sensitive guy, granted, but I found that I can go other places and I can find people who are more in sync with me. Right. People think I'm crazy to talk about China. I feel like a great connection. Whenever I go places and I meet people who are from China, internationally minded Chinese people, they get the business thing, they get the whole thing about who I am. And so being a perpetual traveler, you can tweak how you live your life to find the places that best suit you, not only business-wise, not only money-wise, but let's be honest, you have to be happy in life. And so I was in Thailand for a month. I thought, hey, this may be a place to live. It's probably not a great place for investment, but maybe this is a place someone could live. It's not a place for anything. And so fortunately, rather than growing up in Thailand or being forced to stay there or being forced to have a 5-year employment contract or whatever, I said, you know what? I'm on the next flight and I'm getting out and I hope to never return. And look, other people may disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm not trying to say people should not have their own opinion, but that's the benefit. You know what? I don't like it here. I'm going on to the next place.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It's fantastic hearing about your experiences, and I want to make sure that people can find out more about you. So where can they find you online?
Well, if they go to nomadcapitalist.com, that's the best place to find me. We're writing stuff pretty much every day about, business observations or investment observations. Whatever I see up there, I write about it. We do videos they can find on the site as well. And they should go to your site as well, because we're having an event that I know you're helping us with, and they can learn more about that event on your site as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
So we're going to be in Las Vegas by popular vote. I will be returning to the USSA for the event, January 23rd, 4th, and 5th. Peter Schiff, who is just a fantastic speaker on this, will be keynoting our event. We've got over a dozen other people talking about second passports, offshore banking. Basically, it's going to be everything you need to know whether you want to stay in your home country and fight, or whether you want to join people like myself in fight versus flight. Whichever decision you make, we're going to have the experts share with you the knowledge of how to protect your money, how to be a better investor, how to engage in business, how do you make sure the government doesn't come in and steal your bank account, as the state of California once did to me in a business I ran. They came in and just stole some money from me. So we're going to share with you all the ways to escape the nonsense and the chaos that is descending upon the U.S. and other bankrupt Western countries that I think are totally out of control. So it's 3 days, and you'll leave after that 3 days with a lot of notes and being able to take action. This is not just a gripe fest where we just sit around and complain. But it will be actionable info, and I think they should go to your site and check that out.
Yes, and I'll put links to all of that in the show notes as well. Great. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. It's been great having you on.
I appreciate it, Jake.
Thank you for listening to The Voluntary Life. If you have feedback about the show, please email jake@thevoluntarylife.com. If you enjoyed this program, please share the podcast with your friends or click the donate button on thevoluntarylife.com.